Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Powerful Words with Caleb. We're doing a special engagement tonight on the history of the deep well of Libyan politics and Muammar Gaddafi. The reasons why these things are never told is partially because of the British and French involvement. I want to express some ideals here tonight that I do not ever want you to just accept out of hand. I always consider myself within the realm of those things that need to be investigated, those things that need to be tried, those things that need to be tested. And that's what makes our information valuable here at Patriot Soapbox, is that we're not afraid of pursuing the truth relentlessly, and that's my objective here. So let me get along and start sharing some of these things, because I believe that, as I've said before, in that 25,000-foot view that we are attempting to achieve, the big picture is that Benghazi and Libya was a significant event in the preparation of the current coup attempt against our standing president. And so it was one of the reasons, and so we need to investigate why, what happened in Benghazi, and who the players were, and why it occurred, and what we weren't told. We know that we were told something by the MSM, and we know that we were told something by the dog and pony shows that investigated Benghazi. But what daunts me is what I found out in a half hour to an hour's time completely trumps anything that we were told in those hearings or through the MSM. So you decide. You make decisions on your own and determine what you believe to be true and what you believe to be false. First of all, we know Libya, North African country, typically has had a pretty rough and rocky relationship with the West. When you get a dictator involved who has oil, and Libya is one of the only nations in the northern Mediterranean there, the coast of Africa, that has oil, and so very rich nation. That's part of the reason why they got into a conflict with us, and I think that you'll see clearly after the information that I provide tonight that A, much of it was kept from us, and B, much of it that was kept from us were the real reasons behind Benghazi's assault upon our embassy. And third, that it has been suppressed to such a point that, who cares? I mean, it's just a horrible circumstance that we've concentrated on the events of one particular night or two particular nights in September in 2011, and we've missed the larger picture. And that's often what they do, is they give you a small sliver of pie to look at, so that you don't look at the larger circumference of what's going on in the pizzeria. So let's take a look at what I found, and you decide. So let's start off by sharing some articles. So open up Google here. Now, I would love to go in order. However, there is so much material to present that I'm going to start out with Twitter, because I want you to see some of the tweets that I released on April 2nd, so that you can start doing some of your own reference, okay? Okay, these were tweets that I put out on April 2nd. This one says, okay, this is getting pretty spicy, so it certainly couldn't involve the quiet palates of the British cuisine, and it's a BBC article setting up the process of overthrowing Gaddafi in 2011 with the ambassador. The SAS gets caught. So they get caught with their ambassador there, trying to set up the overthrow of the Libyan government. And to think, Gaddafi's son gave the memorial speech the previous year at the London School of Economics, how quickly one falls from favor with the crown What did they want that he refused to give him? Now, that was my assertion, my question, but I assumed there was something that they wanted. Okay, now we see an unusual relationship here. What we didn't know, a Guardian article, Dark to Light, MI6 CIA Libyan Connection, and the heading says, How Britain Did Gaddafi's Dirty Work. The long read, secret papers show how far MI6 went to please Libya's ruthless intelligence agents, including hoping to kidnap the dictator's enemies. So, really robust article there. Okay, Blair visited Libya for the first time in 25 March 2004, 6 days after Allen sent his Safe Arrival fax. At the same time in London, it was announced that the Anglo-Dutch oil giant Shell had signed a £110 million deal for gas exploration right off the Libyan coast. So there's obviously oil involved because this is 2004. Then we have when the war broke out, the Libyan foreign minister, Musa Kusa, arrives in Britain and is resigning. The UK Foreign Office says as rebel fighters are pushed back by the Gaddafi forces. So he seeks asylum in Britain, and he was Muammar Gaddafi's right-hand man, and also the communique with London. Al-Sadi settles his claim in 2012 when British paid him £2.23 million in compensation without admitting liability. Belhaj brought proceedings against not only the British government, but also against Alan and Jack Straw, who had been Foreign Secretary and responsible for the MI6. Now, these are folks that purportedly were living in the UK and were harassed or delivered to Gaddafi for torture or elsewhere for torture because they were against Gaddafi by the British. And frankly, it appears the renditions were performed by the CIA. Those two were paid compensation by the British government, were Libyan resistance fighters who were kidnapped by MI6, MI5, and the CIA. No wonder when they gained control of Tripoli, they tried to kill the British ambassador, one of whom became the new Libyan leader. Go figure. They found mustard gas, artillery shells, and precursors for the creation of other chemical weapons. Gaddafi, it turns out, had never really shut down his weapons program. The UK and the US had done a deal with one of the worst dictators of the last century, and he had fooled them all along. Let's see. Hillary emails reveal true motive for Libyan intervention. Newly disclosed emails show that Libya planned to create a gold-backed currency to compete with the euro and dollar was a motive for NATO's movement on them. It seems no matter how bizarre the conspiracy theory, as long as it painted Gaddafi and his supporters as monsters, and so long as it served the cause of the prolonged military action in Libya, it was deemed credible by the network news. Instead, the great fear reported is that Libya might lead North Africa into a high degree of economic independence with a new pan-Africa currency. French intelligence discovered a Libyan initiative to freely compete with the European currency through a local alternative, and this had to be subverted through military aggression. Now, these are Hillary Clinton email segments, my understanding. Not only did Defense Secretary Robert Gates promote his bizarre staged bodies theory on CBS News, Face the Nation, but the even stranger Viagra rape fiction made international headlines as U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice, made a formal charge against Libya in front of the UN Security Council. Supposedly, these were, as we will see. What this new email confirms is not only was the State Department aware of the spurious nature of what Blumenthal calls rumors originating solely with the rebels, but did nothing to stop the false information from rising to top officials who gave them credence. It appears furthermore that the Viagra mass rape hoax likely originated with Sidney Blumenthal himself. So so far, we've already discussed a number of items that I never heard in the news. I don't know about you, but I've never heard any of them. So let's go down just to a list of these articles that have frankly opened up my eyes, and I hope they'll do the same for you. Okay. Now we need to, put our time hats on here. This is 2016 article, so this is well after. This is 14 March. It's early on in the spring of the election year. So Hillary's trying to put on her best face. Why Gaddafi had to go, American gold, oil, and the challenge to monetary imperialism. And the caption says, what was NATO's violent intervention in Libya really all about? Now we know, writes Ellen Brown, thanks to Hillary Clinton's recently published emails. It was to prevent the creation of an independent hard currency in Africa that would free the continent from economic bondage under the dollar, the IMF, and the French African franc, shaking off the last heavy chains of colonial exploitation. So this was about colonialism to them, shaking off being colonies. Does that sound familiar? The brief visit of then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to Libya on October 2011 was referred to by media as a victory lap. We came, we saw, he died, she crowned in CBS video interview on hearing of the capture and brutal murder of Libyan leader Muammar el-Gaddafi. But the victory lap, writes Scott Shane and Joe Becker in the New York Times, was premature. Libya was relegated to the back burner by the State Department as the country dissolved into chaos, leading to a civil war that would destabilize the region, fueling the refugee crisis in Europe and allowing the Islamic State to establish a Libyan haven that the United States is now desperately trying to contain. U.S. NATO intervention was allegedly undertaken on humanitarian grounds after reports of mass atrocities, but human rights organizations questioned the claims after finding a lack of evidence. Today, however, verifiable atrocities are occurring. As Dan Kovalik wrote in the Huffington Post, the human rights situation in Libya is a disaster as thousands of detainees, including children, languish in prisons without proper judicial review, and kidnappings and targeted killings are rampant. Before 2011, Libya had achieved economic independence with its own water, its own food, its own oil, its own money, and its own state-owned bank. It had arisen under the Gaddafi from one of the poorest of countries to the richest in Africa. Education and medical treatment was free. Having a home was considered a human right, and Libyans participated in an original system of local democracy. The country boasted the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River Project, which brought water from the desert to the cities and coastal areas. Gaddafi was embarking on a program to spread this model throughout Africa. But that was before U.S. NATO forces bombed the irrigation system and wreaked havoc on the country. Today, the situation is so dire that President Obama has asked his advisors to draw up options, including a new military front in Libya, and the Defense Department is reportedly standing ready with full spectrum of military operations required. The Secretary of State's victory lap was indeed premature, and if what we're talking about is the official stated goal of humanitarian intervention, but her newly released emails reveal another agenda behind the Libyan war, and this one, it seems, was achieved. Mission accomplished. Of the 3,000 emails released to Hillary Clinton's private email server in late December 2015, about a third were from her close confidant, Sidney Blumenthal, the attorney who defended her husband in the Monica Lewinsky case. One of these emails, dated April 2nd, 2011, read in part, Gaddafi's government holds 143 tons of gold and a similar amount in silver. The gold was accumulated prior to the current rebellion and was intended to be used to establish a Pan-African currency based on the Libyan gold dinar. The plan was designed to provide the Francophone African countries with an alternate to the French franc. In a source comment, the original declassified email adds, according to the knowledgeable individuals, this quantity of gold and silver is valued at more than 7 billion. French intelligence officers discovered this plan shortly after the current rebellion began, and this was one of the factors that influenced President Nicolas Sarkozy's decision to commit France to the attack on Libya. According to these individuals, Sarkozy's plans are driven by the following issues. 1, a desire to gain a greater share of Libya oil production. 2, increase French influence in North Africa. 3, improve his internal political situation in France. 4, provide the French military with an opportunity to reassert its position in the world. And 5, address the concern of his advisors over Gaddafi's long-term plan to supplant France as the dominant power in the Francophone Africa. Conspicuously absent is any mention of humanitarian concerns. The objectives are money, power, and oil. Other explosive confirmations in the newly published emails are detailed by investigative journalist Robert Perry that include admissions of rebel war crimes, of special ops trainers inside Libya from nearly the start of the protests, and all al-Qaeda embedded in U.S.-backed opposition. Key propaganda themes for violent intervention are acknowledged to be mere rumors. Perry suggests they may have originated with Blumenthal himself. They include the bizarre claim that Gaddafi had a rape policy involving passing Viagra out to his troops, a charge later raised by UN Ambassador Susan Rice in a UN presentation. Perry asks rhetorically, quotes, "So, do you think it would be easier for the Obama administration to rally American support behind this regime change by explaining how the French wanted to steal Libya's wealth and maintain French neo-colonial influence over Africa? Or would Americans respond better to propaganda themes about Gaddafi passing out Viagra to his troops so they could rape more women while his snipers targeted innocent children? Bingo." Toppling the global financial scheme, Gaddafi's threatened attempt to establish an independent African currency was not taken lightly by Western interests. In 2011, Sarkozy reported calling the Libyan leader a threat to the financial security of the world. How could this tiny country of 6 million people pose such a threat? First, some background. It is banks, not governments, that create most of the money in the Western economies. As of the Bank of England recently acknowledged, this has been going on for centuries through the process of what's called fractional reserve lending. Originally, the reserves in gold. In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt replaced gold domestically with central bank created reserves, but gold remained the reserve currency internationally. In 1944, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to unify this bank-created monetary system globally. An IMF ruling said that no paper money could have gold backing. A money supply created privately as debt at interest requires a continual supply of debtors. And over the next half-century, most developing countries wound up in debt to the IMF. The loans came with strings attached, including structural adjustment policies involving austerity measures and the privatization of public assets. After 1944, the U.S. dollar traded interchangeably with gold as a global reserve currency. When the U.S. was no longer able to maintain the dollar's gold backing in 1970s, it made a deal with OPEC to back the dollar with oil, creating the petrodollar. Oil would be sold only in U.S. dollars, which would be deposited in Wall Street and other international banks. In 2001, dissatisfied with the shrinking value of dollars that OPEC was getting for its oil, Iraq's Saddam Hussein broke the pact and sold oil in euros. You see that? 2001, Hussein sold his oil in euros. Regime change swiftly followed, accompanied by widespread destruction of the country. In Libya, Gaddafi also broke the pact, but he did more than just sell his oil in another currency, as these developments are detailed by the blogger Denise Rhine. Quotes, "For decades, Libya and other African countries have been attempting to create a Pan-African gold standard. Libya's al-Gaddafi and other heads of African states had wanted an independent Pan-African hard currency. Under al-Gaddafi's leadership, African nations had convened at least twice for monetary unification. The countries discussed the possibility of using the Libyan dinar and the silver dirham as the only possible money to buy African oil. Until the recent U.S.-NATO invasion, the gold dinar was issued by the Central Bank of Libya, CBL. The Libyan bank was 100% state-owned and independent. Foreigners had to go through the CBL to do business with Libya. The Central Bank of Libya issued the dinar using the country's 143.8 tons of gold. Libya's Gaddafi, African Union 2009 chair, conceived and financed a plan to unify sovereign states of Africa with one currency, United States of Africa. In 2004, a Pan-African Parliament, 53 nations, laid plans for the African Economic Community with a single gold currency by 2023. African oil-producing nations were planning to abandon the petrodollar and demand gold payment for oil and gas. Gaddafi has done more than organize an African monetary coup. He has demonstrated that the financial independence could be achieved. His greatest infrastructure project, the Great Man-Made River, was turning arid regions into breadbasket for Libya, and the $33 billion project was being funded interest-free without foreign debt through Libya's own state-owned bank. That could explain why this critical piece of infrastructure was destroyed in 2011. NATO not only bombed the pipeline, but finished off the project by bombing the factory producing the pipes necessary to repair it. Crippling a civilian irrigation system serving up to 70% of the population hardly looks like humanitarian intervention. Rather, as Canadian professor Maximilian Fort put it in his heavily researched book, Slouching Towards Sirte, NATO's War on Libya and Africa. Quotes, the goal of U.S. military intervention was to disrupt an emerging pattern of independence and a network of collaboration within Africa that would facilitate increased African self-reliance. This is at odds with the geostrategic and political economic ambitions of extracontinental European powers, namely the U.S. Mystery solved. Hillary Clinton's emails shed light on another enigma remarked on by early commentators. Why, within weeks of initiating fighting, did the rebels set up their own central bank? This suggests we have a bit more of a ragtag bunch of rebels running around, and that there are some pretty sophisticated influences. I have never before heard of a central bank being created in just a matter of weeks out of a popular uprising. It was all highly suspicious, as Alex Newman concluded in November 2011 article. Whether salvaging central banking and the corrupt global monetary system were truly among the reasons for Gaddafi's overthrow may never be known for certain, at least not publicly. There the matter would have remained suspicious but unverified, like so many stories of fraud and corruption. But for the publication of Hillary Clinton's emails after FBI probe, they add substantial weight to Newman's suspicions. Violent intervention was not chiefly about the security of the people. It was about the security of global banking, money, and oil. That is frightening. I mean, that's just frightening to see that we participated in that, and that came about because of global intervention in stopping the independence of a North African country and perhaps other countries. Well, let's continue. Okay. The next article. It's a New York Times article that was referred to in that last article. Okay, let's see if we can get this header up. Okay, Hillary Clinton's Smart Power and a Dictator's Fall, New York Times article. Let's see whom I had her back there. This is, again, late winter of 2016. By the time Mohamed Jibril cleared customs at Le Bourget airport and sped into Paris, the American Secretary of State had been waiting for hours, but this is not a meeting Hillary Clinton could cancel. Their encounter could decide whether America was again going to go to war. In the throes of the Arab Spring, Colonel Muammar el-Gaddafi was facing a furious revolt by Libyans determined to end his quixotic 42-year rule. The dictator's forces were approaching Benghazi, the crucible of the rebellion, and threatening a bloodbath. France and Britain were urging the United States to join them in the military campaign to halt Colonel Gaddafi's troops, and now the Arab League, too, was calling for action. Okay, I need to mention right off, France and Britain were urging the United States to get involved. So we need to understand that, again, we're seeing an EU-based British and French operation to get involved here, okay? President Obama was deeply wary of another military venture in the Muslim country. Most of his senior advisors were telling him to stay out. Still, he dispatched Mrs. Clinton to sound out Mr. Jabril, a leader of the Libyan opposition. Their late-night meeting on March 14, 2011, would be the first chance for a top American official to get a sense of whom exactly the United States was being asked to support. In her suite at the Westin, she and Mr. Jabril, a political scientist with a doctorate from the University of Pittsburgh, spoke at length about the fast-moving military situation in Libya, but Mrs. Clinton was clearly also thinking about Iraq and its hard lessons for American intervention. Did the opposition Transitional National Council really represent the whole of a deeply divided country or just one region? What if Gaddafi quit, fled, or was killed? Did they have a plan for what came next? She was asking every question you could imagine, Mr. Jabril recalled. Ms. Clinton was won over. Opposition leaders said all the right things in supporting democracy and inclusivity and building Libyan institutions, providing some hope that we might be able to pull this off, said Philip H. Gordon, one of the assistant secretaries. They gave us what we wanted to hear. And do you want to believe? So let's move on in these articles that we've got here. Now, if I'm correct, this article is a 2011 article, which is way back in the cycle. And this is Ilana Mercer at WND, and she is not very happy with the government, the U.S. government, obviously. 8/25/2011. I don't like conspiracy theories. They're the refuge of the weak-minded. Reality is bad enough. There is no need to explain the world with using conjecture and fantasy. The facts suffice. In particular, imputing garden-variety government evils to conspiracies is based on the following faulty premise. Government generally does what is good for us, not. So whenever we think it is failing in a mission it fills so well, not. We should look beyond the facts for something more sinister, not. As if the state's natural quest for unlimited power were not enough to explain the events, why, for example, would you need to search for the real reason for an unjust, unscrupulous war unless you honestly believed government would never prosecute such a war? So, you know, her political misgivings aside, let's get down to the comment with regard to Libya, because that's, after all, what this is supposed to be about. Okay, this article is going very slow. You ever notice how some of these news stations are just killing themselves with way too much advertisement? They're making it, you know, impossible, almost impossible to read the articles. Rather than wind down, as we were told it would, the United States' direct invasion of Libya has gained momentum. Rather than continue to misfire their weapons, Libyan rebels have suddenly materialized as lean, mean fighting machines. They've stormed and taken the capital, Tripoli. 1 minute, the entities labeled rebels by an adoring American media were being repelled back to their Benghazi stronghold by a well-trained army of Libyan conscripts. Next, you know, the same men had captured Colonel Gaddafi's compound. What you won't see or hear if you watch Fox News, MSNBC, or CNN, whose prostitutes, there's an interesting word, don't report but root for whichever side is in conflict benefits their favorite political party or ideology, you will get from Russia Today. As RT reports, the UK's Secret Service has been engaged in drilling Libyan rebels, helping them to establish a proper military plan for an assault on the capital, Tripoli. The UK not only dispatched spies and former special ops to train militants, but had been providing them with ammunition for the operation, including night vision goggles, advanced communication equipment, and no less than 1,000 sets of body armor. Now, I want you to... I'm not going to say what I'm thinking, but you know what I am thinking. Okay, this is 2011. This is before the assault on our embassy occurred, and we find The Russian Times, or Russia Today, is reporting the British are training the rebels to take over Tripoli and giving them weapons. Okay, I know you're thinking what I'm thinking. So let's go on. GlobalPost.com has confirmed that the North Atlantic Military Alliance has ramped up in its 5-month-old campaign of airstrikes, insisting that 4,000 targets NATO had leveled so far were all legitimate military targets. These sorties have brought the regime to its knees, a NATO spokesperson asserted. Let's rewind the newsreel. In 2009, his capacity as the head of African Union, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi had proposed that the economically crippled continent adopt the gold dinar. I do not know if Colonel Gaddafi continued to agitate for ditching the dollar and adopting the gold dinar, or if the agitator from Chicago got wind of Gaddafi's uncharacteristic sanity about things monetary. This much I do know. America is crashing and burning. Monetary policy and media spin have obfuscated this inescapable reality. Most Americans are quite happy to remain suspended in a world of make-believe where the U.S. is still a superpower, despite the fact that combined American state and personal debt now approximates $65 trillion. My countrymen expect to continue cruising on credit and on the backs of dwindling numbers of producers among them. It turns out that any confidence America had in its profligate European and English allies had placed in the sheer stupidity of African Union leaders had paid off. By goldbuzzer.com's telling the Libyan leader had failed to convince the African Union to adopt a gold currency. The gold dinar was dismissed and Gaddafi demoted, nor had Gaddafi made headway in persuading oil-rich Middle Eastern leaders to demand gold rather than debased dollars for their oil, which would be absolutely tragic. So that's an interesting article. Let's go on. Gaddafi's gold money. It appears this is a pretty well-known subject that is not reported at all, at least to my knowledge, in most media. 11 November 2011, a year before the assault, approximately. It remains unclear exactly why or how the Gaddafi regime went from a model and an important ally to the next target for a regime change in a period of just a few years. But after claims of genocide as the justification for NATO intervention were disputed by experts, several other theories have been floated. Oil, of course, has been mentioned frequently. Libya is Africa's largest oil producer, but one possible reason in particular for Gaddafi's fall from grace has gained significant traction among analysts and segments of the non-Western media, central banking, and global monetary system. Of course, non-Western media, non-central banking, and global monetary system. According to more than few observers, Gaddafi's plan to quit selling Libyan oil in US dollars, demanding payment instead in gold-backed dinars, a single African currency made from gold, was the real cause. The regime, sitting on massive amounts of gold estimated at close to 150 tons, was also, I scrolled a bit too far, was also pushing other African and Middle Eastern country governments to follow suit. And it literally had the potential to bring down the dollar and the world monetary system by extension. According to analyst, French President Nicolas Sarkozy reportedly went so far as to call Libya a threat to the financial security of the world. The insiders were apparently panicking over Gaddafi's plan. Any move such as that would certainly not be welcomed by the power elite today, who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks, noted financial analyst Anthony Wild, editor of the free market-oriented Daily Bell, in an interview with RT. So yes, that would certainly be something that would cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forward, removing him from power. Okay, so there's your confirmation. They say it would be enough to remove Gaddafi from power. And he'd been in power for what, 42 years? According to the Wild, Gaddafi's plan would have strengthened the whole continent of Africa in the eyes of economists backing sound money, not to mention investors. But it would have been especially devastating for the U.S. economy, the American dollar, and particularly the elite in charge of the system. The central banking Ponzi scheme requires an ever-increasing base of demand, and the immediate silencing scroll so fast. Pardon me. Start again. The central banking Ponzi scheme requires an ever-increasing base of demand and the immediate silencing of those who would threaten its existence. While noted in a piece entitled Gaddafi Planned Gold Dinar Now Under Attack earlier this year, perhaps that is what the hurry was in removing Gaddafi in particular and those who might have been sympathetic to his monetary idea. Investor newsletter and commentaries have been buzzing for months with speculation about the link between Gaddafi's gold dinar and the NATO-backed overthrow of the Libyan regime. Conservative analysts pounced on the potential relationship too. In 2009, in his capacity as the head of the African Union, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi had proposed that the economically crippled continent adopt the gold dinar, noted Alana Mercer in an August opinion piece for WorldNet Daily. I do not know if Colonel Gaddafi continued to agitate for ditching the dollar and adopt the gold dinar, or the agitator from Chicago got wind of. So this is referencing that last article we had. So again, we've got folks that are reporting on this supposed Ponzi scheme of the oil-rich elite. Okay, back to the British for a moment. On the British coat of arms, it says, "Du et mon droit." So, God et mon droit, God and my right, is the motto of the monarchy in the United Kingdom outside of Scotland. So Scotland's a little different because it refers to Richard the First's in 1157 to 1199, his reference to him being in the line of succession as the French king. So he has a divine right to monarchy. So it's in French, which is really strange that it's French on the UK coat of arms. But, you know, I get it. just a thought there. Okay. I wanted to change up the flow a bit here because this really is another strange aspect of this Benghazi story. The ambassador from the United Kingdom to Libya, who was in Benghazi, suffered an assassination attempt in June of 2012. Closed down the embassy there. Everybody skedaddled back to the UK. Of course, our embassy got attacked in September, so several months later. And then he was knighted on New Year's Eve, made a knight. And then he was sent back to Benghazi as an unpaid representative in the following spring. So he had left some 10 months earlier because of an assassination attempt. All British citizens were demanded to leave, and I'll show you that note on the 1st of January of 2013. And yet he goes back there as an unpaid assignment to help the British businesses within several months of that date. And now, in 2016, 3 years later, he is made the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom's consulate in India, one of their largest ambassadorships. Something I thought I'd point out. Chatham House, remember that. And has just mounted a campaign with Amal Clooney, has just hired Amal Clooney as a representative, lawyer representative, to protect the media. I'm sorry. It got a chuckle out of me. Bear with me. Now, this is the fella here. This is Dominic Askeith. Sir Dominic Askeith. I won't say what that sounds like. He's High Commissioner to the consulate in New Delhi, which is it's a huge position, folks. Huge position. Let's move on. Okay, we're moving to another article here. If Twitter ever lets me go. This is a BBC article about that assault in June of 2012. Libya unrest, UK's convoy attacked in Benghazi. 2 British bodyguards have been injured in an attack on the convoy carrying the British ambassador to Libya, embassy officials have said. Ambassador Dominic Askeith and all other staff were unhurt in the attack on Benghazi. A rocket-propelled grenade hit the car and carrying the consular team's security escort, a Libyan official said. It is not known who carried out the attack, which comes days after the U.S. mission was targeted. The Red Cross and UN have also come under attack recently. Why would the Red Cross and the UN come under attack? The U.S. mission in Benghazi was targeted after Washington's announcement of the death of Abu Yahya al-Libi, a Libyan who was a top al-Qaeda operative in Pakistan. An embassy spokeswoman told the BBC a convoy carrying the British ambassador to Libya was involved in a serious incident in Benghazi this afternoon. 2 British close protection officers were injured in the attack. They are receiving medical treatment. The UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office said it was working with the Libyan authorities to work out who was responsible. Benghazi served as the headquarters of the Libyan rebels in their battle to depose Muammar al-Gaddafi last year, and it has had a number of attacks on international staff this year in which nobody was injured. Okay, so this is a common theme that we're seeing, that these rebels, quote, rebels, are not rabble. They're well-trained. Many of them have PhDs. Many of them have trained and been educated abroad, and many of them have purportedly been trained by NATO themselves. It seemed like a common theme. You train rebels, you get them functional, your CIA or MI6, MI5 train them, and then they become a danger themselves. Where have I heard that before? ISIS. I mean, how many times have we heard that's a common theme? So I'm going to go ahead and say that I believe this one, that this is what did happen. Okay, the 2012 Benghazi attack was a coordinated attack against 2 United States government facilities in Benghazi, Libya by the members of the Islamic militant group Ansar al-Sharia. At 9:40 p.m. September 11th, members of the Ansar al-Sharia attacked the foreign American diplomatic compound in Benghazi, resulting in the deaths of U.S. Ambassador to Libya Christopher Stevens and U.S. Foreign Service Information Management Officer Sean Smith. Stevens was the first U.S. ambassador killed in the line of duty since 1979. Now, I need to stop and just give these gentlemen the credit and the honor, and the CIA folks that defended them, the military representatives that were there, that gave their lives and protected their brothers in this instance. You matter greatly. We love you, and we're sorry what happened to you. And to the extent that we were perhaps involved or duped over this issue, and that this was perpetrated against you by our own people or people that we trained, and they were set loose, and they were angered at us as a country for what we've done because our leaders have gone astray. Accountability is coming, and we're sorry you had to go through that, and we're sorry for your losses. We love you, and we ask the Lord's intervention in your life to heal the wounds that may never be healed in this lifetime. I ask these things in Jesus' precious name. We love you and we honor you this very day. Thank you for doing what you did. Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty, others. Many of them out there currently telling their story and not being heard or partially being heard. And we want you to know that we're investigating this and we're going to, the best of our ability, we're going to figure this out. Dominic Askeith, the Honorable Sir Dominic Anthony Gerard Askeith, KCMG, is a British career diplomat and former ambassador to Iraq, Egypt, and Libya. He is currently the British High Commissioner to the Republic of India. He is the younger son of the second Earl of Oxford. He was the great-grandson of H.H. Askeith, the former British Prime Minister. Askeith's elder brother, Father Lord Oxford, and maternal grandfather, Sir Michael Palairet, all served as British diplomats like his father and brother. He was educated at Ampleforth College. Okay, he's a member of Chatham House. He was at Chatham House when Hillary Clinton was awarded the Chatham House Award in 2013 after that entire Benghazi debacle. I'm sorry, this angers me to see that our allies have not necessarily been allies. All this stuff needs to come out, and we need to eat the meal that we brought for lunch, no matter how unpleasant this is. British say weapons they left at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi are missing. Okay. October 12, 2012. So, I'm not going to say what I'm thinking, but you know what I'm thinking, that weapons that were left at the U.S. consulate by the British when they closed up their consulate were suddenly missing. Okay. When British diplomats abandoned their offices in Benghazi over the summer after the British ambassador's motorcade was attacked with rocket-propelled grenades, their security detail left its weapons and vehicles in the custody of the U.S. consulate in that eastern Libyan city. Now that cache of weapons is missing amid signs that the Islamic militants suspected in the September 11th attacks on the U.S. consulate and nearby annex remain active despite Libyan government demands that they disband. Okay. That's as far as I'm going to go into that because, you know, that's a road we need to go down. That, boy, I don't know where you'd be able to prove those weapons went unless they had U.S. or British markings on them and they were found. Okay. So you trained people to fight against Gaddafi to take him down. Then they tried to use their abilities to take you out. So you leave the country, you go get knighted, you come back as an unpaid manager after admitting that the weapons that you left behind were left at the American consulate, which was unprotected and was asking for extra security detail and was subsequently destroyed, of which our Secretary of State had the gall to say, what difference does it make? Makes a huge amount of difference. You know what? I'm not going to call you ma'am anymore. I'll love you and I'll pray for you. But you apparently are just wicked beyond my understanding. Forgive me, Lord. Give me the power to forgive. Okay, this was the announcement on the BBC on January 25th of 2013, of which 4 months later, Their ambassador, who has now been knighted, goes back on an unpaid position 4 months later after being told all Britons must leave that city, goes back to lead up a business delegation. God help us. British nationals have been urged by the Foreign Office to leave Libyan city of Benghazi immediately in response to specific and imminent threat to Westerners. Germany's government issued a similar warning to its citizens on Thursday. No details were given by the UK of the nature of the threat, likely to have been issued in response to intelligence information about the security situation. But security sources in Libya said an attack was expected on an oil or gas facility. Oil or gas? Oil or gas, folks. Oil or gas. Amazing, huh? Let's stop the share for a second. Okay, there's a great deal of consternation that comes along with this issue because it's an unresolved issue. It's an open wound. For me, obviously, I can feel it. I can feel that this thing has never been resolved in my own heart. And I can only imagine. I don't know, but I can only imagine that those that were involved or have family members or close friends who are involved, it's a gaping wound. So right now, what I need to do is change roles. Look, this is about health of America. This is about us enduring this. This is about us getting through this, and we're not going to get through this if we don't bear each other's burdens and we don't shore up each other's positions and we don't come to the defense of our brothers and sisters out there. And so at this time, I just need to go to the Lord. This is so painful for me to go through this and see that not only our position in this, but also our allies, and see that we were just blindfolded, gagged, and stuck in the corner. And that's what they think of us. And that's a painful thought. It's a painful consideration. It's difficult to imagine of free people that are just kept in the dark and fed so much feces. If I may, I'd like to go to the Lord. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for the opportunity to come before you and just plead my bleeding heart, Father, my wounded psyche, my upset. It appears that our country has been involved in many wicked and duplicitous and questionable acts, and that we, either standing by or supporting them, have given basically tacit approval to a nightmare in which we're involved and we've become wounded by, and many individuals in the world have lost their lives and lost their wealth and their families over. And it's just, to use the word tragic is just, I don't know, Lord, it just seems simplistic. Father, we ask that you come to our aid, that you bring those accountable for these actions to the light, Lord, that we might bring them to justice. And those who have been appointed by you to mete out that justice, that they do it fair and equitably with much prayer. But that these people be given justice. And if they should escape justice in this life, Lord, we know that they're going to meet you. And we know we need to take solace in the fact that they're not going to get away with this stuff. But Lord, give us our country back. Separate us from allies that would do these things. And let us not get involved in this type of diplomatic and ridiculous intrigue that just makes no sense and sees people die for monetary reasons. We ought to be better than that. And if we turned our hearts to you, Lord, we would. So the answer to this is turning our hearts back to you, and that's what I ask you. Father, send forth your Holy Spirit to tap them on the shoulder, to break through that veil that's been placed over their own minds and their own eyes, so that they might see you and that they might hear you. Lord, let them bring themselves to justice, the accountability of throwing themselves down at the cross and accepting responsibility for their lives. Lord, watch over those who've been wounded by these circumstances. We love you and we thank you for always being involved in our lives, and we know that our prayers work. And so I beseech you now to get involved to set this thing right. And don't let us get involved in wars for oil anymore, Lord. Please. Please, it just disparages the gift that you've given us, the honor that we should have in being a blessed nation that's been bestowed by the Lord. We love you and we thank you, and we're so sorry. I am so sorry, Lord, for my moments of frailty. Let me be the honorable man that you've set me to be. Fill me with your spirit, Lord, and take away my own. I love you and I praise you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, let's look if we have any additional articles to refer you to here, and I think we do. These were articles that follow up on the consideration that many of Hillary's emails revealed the fact that this war was not necessarily about anything but gold and oil. And that Gaddafi, if you read these articles, what you will find is that Gaddafi was actually trying to make friends with the US and with the UK because he feared them attacking him. And so he was doing everything diplomatically he could as a dictator who had been their enemy for so long to try to develop diplomatic relations, including sending his son to the London School of Economics. And what Hillary's emails did indicate is that there's a much worse story behind this whole thing than we've ever been told. That there were actually death squads trained by us, foreign mercenaries, all manner of things going on here. And, there were contract workers and just, all those things that we don't like to hear about, but we know are going on, were happening in this. Even to the point where, again, we're seeing reference that U.S. and other special force groups, British, French, Egyptian, have been training Libyan militants who are actually Al-Qaeda. I mean, this is just, to me, this is treason. I can understand why they would want to keep this from us. But again, we see in this article the threat of Libya's oil and gold to French interests. Again, we see the reference that France was asking for an attack on Libya. Britain was asking for an attack on Libya. And we obliged them. And that they did a horrible disservice to the nation of Libya by bombing their water projects and humanitarian things that should have been left alone. I bring you to Michael Flynn. How did we get to Michael Flynn? Well, in the same journal of that last article, the Foreign Policy Journal, Michael Flynn gave an interview to them. In Al Jazeera's latest head-to-head episode, former Director of Defense Intelligence Agency Michael Flynn confirms to Mehdi Hassan that not only had he studied the DIA memo predicting the West backing of an Islamic State in Syria when it came across his desk in 2012, but even asserts that the White House's sponsoring of radical jihadists that would emerge as ISIL and al-Nusra against the Syrian regime was a willful decision. Amazingly, Flynn actually took issue with the way interviewer Mehdi Hassan posed the question. Flynn seemed to want to make it clear that the policies that led to the rise of ISIL were not merely the result of ignorance or looking the other way, but the result of conscious decision-making. You were basically saying that even in government at the time, you knew these groups were around, you saw this analysis, and you were arguing against it, but who wasn't listening? I think the administration, Flynn says. Hassan, so the administration turned a blind eye to your analysis. Flynn, I don't know that they turned a blind eye. I think it was a decision. I think it was a willful decision. Hassan, a willful decision to support an insurgency that had Salafists, Al-Qaeda, and Muslim Brotherhood. Flynn, it was a willful decision to do what they're doing. Hassan himself expressed his surprise at Flynn's frankness during this portion of the interview while holding up a paper copy of the 2012 DIA report declassified through FOIA. Hassan reads aloud key passages such that there is a possibility of establishing a declared and undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers of the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime. Rather than downplay the importance of the document in these startling passages, as did the State Department soon after its release, Flynn does the opposite. He confirms that while acting DIA chief, he paid very close attention to this report. In particular, later adds that the intelligence was very clear. Lieutenant General Flynn, speaking safely from retirement, is the highest-ranking intelligence official to go on the record saying the United States and other state sponsors of rebels in Syria knowingly gave political backing and shipped weapons to al-Qaeda in order to put pressure on the Syrian regime. Hassan, in 2012, the U.S. was helping coordinate arms transfers to these same groups, Salafist, Muslim Brotherhood, al-Qaeda, and Iraq. Why did you not stop that if you're worried about the rise of quote, unquote, Islamic extremists? Flynn, I hate to say it's not my job, but that my job was to ensure the accuracy of our intelligence that was being presented was as good as it could be. The early reporting that treated the DIO memo as newsworthy and hugely revelatory was criticized and even mocked by some experts, as well as the outlets like the Daily Beast. Yet the very DIA director at the time the memo was drafted and circulated widely now unambiguously confirms the document to be of high value and indicates that it served as a source material in his own discussions over Syria's policy with the White House. As Michael Flynn also previously served as the Director of Intelligence for Joint Special Ops Command, JSOC, during a time when its prime global mission was dismantling al-Qaeda, his honest admission to the White House was in fact arming and bolstering al-Qaeda-linked groups in Syria is especially shocking, given his stature. Consider further dissonance that comes with viewing the Pentagon's former highest-ranking intelligence officer in charge of the hunt for Osama bin Laden now calmly and coolly confessing that the United States directly aided the foot soldiers of Ayman al-Zawahiri beginning in at least 2012 in Syria. The confirmation is significant to my own coverage of the DIA report, as I was contacted by a number of individuals who attempted to assure me that the true experts and insiders knew the document was unimportant and therefore irrelevant within the intelligence community and broader Syria policy. This began after Daily Beast article entitled "The ISIS Conspiracy That Ate the Web" cited former NSA officer John Schindler as an expert source. Schindler concluded the DIA document is difficult to say much meaningful about it, nothing special here, not one bit. To my surprise, only hours after I published a rebuttal of Schindler and Daily Beast article, I was contacted by a current high-level CIA officer who is also a personal friend from my time living in the D.C. area. This official, who spent most of his career in CIA public affairs, made a personal appeal urging me to drop my comments attacking John Schindler's credibility, as I had noted that Schindler is a highly ideological and scandal-laden commentator who consistently claims special insider knowledge in support of his arguments. The CIA official further attempted to convince me of Schindler's credibility as an insider and expert, assuring me that he had written insightfully. Mehdi Hassan's historic interview with General Flynn should put the issue to rest. The declassified DIA report is now confirmed to be a central and vital source that sheds light on the origins of ISIS and must inform a candid national debate on American policy in Syria and Iraq. as is now already becoming part of the official record on conflict in Syria among respected international historians. Knowledge of the declassified document must make it into every American household. And I would submit, after hearing this, I can see why they would fire Flynn, because he was delivering the intelligence that they required him to deliver, but also delivering the recommendations that they not do this, and they fired him. But he knew it, and they were going to go ahead with it anyway, so cause for him to be fired, correct? Okay, March 2011. Libya unrest, SAS members captured near Benghazi with their ambassador. You can't fake this stuff. You can't make it up, folks. Details of UK operation to rebel-held Benghazi in Libya, in which 8 men, 6 reportedly SAS, were detained, have been disclosed to the BBC. State TV has played a tape where a man said to be the UK ambassador tells a rebel spokesman the team went to liaise with rebels on the National Council. He carries on to say the group wanted to keep an eye on the humanitarian situation in Benghazi. Defense Secretary Liam Fox said a small diplomatic team was in Benghazi and they were in touch with them. Okay, this is getting just absolutely insane, folks, and Britain needs to answer for this stuff, because this is 6 March 2011. Okay? Come on. Stop. Just stop. The nonsense had to stop. The truth has to come out. Okay, this one really is the one that really needs to be answered. How Britain did Gaddafi's dirty work. Secret papers show how far MI6 went to please Libya's ruthless intelligence agents, including helping to kidnap the dictator's enemies by even Cobain. 5 days after 9/11, early on a Sunday evening, a small group of senior CIA officials drove from their headquarters in Langley, Virginia, to the British Embassy at 3100 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C., in order to brief MI6 on the agency's planned response to the attacks right after 9/11. Leading the delegation was Cofer Black, head of CIA's counterterrorist center. Black was still wearing the same suit he had put on 5 days earlier and looked shattered. He had been working day and night to draw up a cogent plan to protect his country from any further attacks. Inside the embassy, Black and his colleagues gave a 3-hour presentation on their plans. The CIA had been running a kidnap and interrogation project on a small scale since the mid-90s, targeting jihadists in Bosnia. It was known as the Rendition Program. The plan was to dramatically increase the scale and scope of the program. Okay, so this goes through that death toll of 9/11. But when you get into how it reflects with regard to Libya, it changes a bit. One of the most pressing imperatives was to create close ties with the intelligence agencies of the Arab world. With this aim, in 2002, the CIA and MI6 began cooperating with the Libyan External Security Organization, ESO, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's notorious overseas intelligence agency. Okay, this is 2002, folks. This is 10 years before Benghazi. We are cooperatives by the CIA and MI6 with his intelligence agency. The stated agenda was learn more about militant Islamism, but that would change the following year once Allen and his British political masters saw an opportunity to enter into negotiations with Gaddafi over his program to develop weapons of mass destruction. Gaddafi had been trying to develop nuclear capabilities since the early 70s, initially by trying to acquire Indian-made weapons and then by attempting to gain access to uranium ore enrichment technology. From the late summer of 2003, as the war in Iraq began to go badly for the U.S. and its allies, it became increasingly clear that Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction, the WMD program that officially justified the invasion of Iraq, did not exist. But if Gaddafi could be persuaded to abandon his own nuclear plans, those who had pressed for war against Iraq claimed the invasion had been vindicated. So they were looking to tell a good story now that Iraq was falling apart. Opponents of the Gaddafi regime who had been living legally in the UK for years were detained by British police, and the British government made a determined attempt to have them deported to Tripoli. Asylum seekers and British Libyan nationals in Manchester and London were menaced by Gaddafi's agents, who were invited into the UK and permitted to operate on the streets of Britain alongside MI5. British intelligence handed over details of the target's telephone calls to the ESO, and their relatives and friends in Libya were arrested and threatened. Folks, this article really hurts because it goes on to show that our own CIA picked these people up, these enemies of Gaddafi, and they were tortured. They were tortured, you know, in ally situations. And the information was given back to Gaddafi because we were in cooperation with him. And these same folks, Abdel Hakim Belhaj and others, were leaders of the rebel team. So not only did we have them tortured, but then we trained them as rebels. What angry people were created from this. This is one that needs to be investigated and followed up on. And it does have some supporting information. You can go to Baraka Books. There is a book called Slouching Towards Sirte, which is a book on the specifics, NATO's war on Libya and Africa. It does do justice to giving you, you know, the information that should be heard. You know, it really pains me to look at this because it tells a really different story about my America than I really want to believe or wish to tell. But the reality is we are honest people, and we value the truth above our own feelings. And so this is the truth. And I pray that it's investigated deeply and soundly, and that every one of these ideals that I've put forth tonight are, you know, in my heart of hearts, I wish they weren't true. I wish they were found out to be false, but they don't look false. This looks to be the true story, is that we got involved not only in Libya because of them trying to be independent of the oil dollar, the petrodollar, but we did the same to Saddam Hussein for the petrodollar, because he started selling oil in euros. If that's the case, and people, U.S. soldiers lost their lives for the purpose of you know, look, they're going to say, well, you know, our economy would crash. We couldn't have our economy crash. Is it worth all the lives that were lost? Is it worth the life of one soldier that you lied to him and told him that there were weapons of mass destruction, and that's the reason why he had to leave his family and lose his limbs or lose his life over a lie? You know, how long are you going to be in command and be able to lie to voluntary soldiers who are willing to go all in for America? An America that obviously is run by an elite group of global fascists with a lot of money who are willing to do whatever they can. And shame on you, Britain. Shame on you, France. And shame on you, EU, for participating in these things. We all ought to be shamed if this is the truth. Well, this is Caleb, and I'm reporting for Patriot Soapbox. And my heart is a bit heavy, and I am sorry that I've had to deliver such a lengthy, sad, but true presentation. I thank you for coming to this evening, and I wish you the best of weeks. And may the Lord make his face to shine upon you, and may this truth set things right. Have a wonderful evening. This is Caleb out for Patriot Soapbox.